Chapter 17. Recovery after internal disturbance. Internal disturbance is inevitable. A mind that never becomes unsettled is either insulated from life or incapable of caring. The question is not whether disturbance will occur, but how long it will occupy you once it does. Some people lose an entire afternoon to a sharp email. Some lose a week to a tense meeting. Some carry a minor mistake like a bruise that keeps getting pressed. The disturbance itself may last minutes. The aftermath can last days. That mismatch is where most unnecessary cost is hidden. Recovery is often treated as a personality matter. People speak as though some are resilient and others are not. In reality, recovery is frequently a timing matter. It is the speed at which attention can be brought back into contact without requiring emotional conditions to improve first. The system does not need to be free of sensation to return. It needs only to stop obeying sensation as though it were a command. A ship does not need calm water to be steered. It needs a hand that stays on the wheel. Disturbance tends to break attention in predictable ways. The mind narrows as though the moment has become a threat. The body begins holding tension as though holding tension might prevent what has already happened. The narrative apparatus starts running, replaying scenes, revising lines, imagining outcomes, assigning motive. The mind begins living in an alternate timeline where it can still win, still be understood, still erase the discomfort. Meanwhile, actual time continues. Work waits. People wait. The present moment becomes a place you are physically in but psychologically avoiding. The sophistication of recovery begins with seeing disturbance as mechanics rather than meaning. Meaning keeps the disturbance alive. A person treats the internal surge as evidence about the situation, about the relationship, about themselves. They begin interpreting the emotion as a message that must be decoded before life can proceed. Decoding is endless because emotion does not speak in clear propositions. It speaks in sensation. Sensation can be intense without being specific. When the mind insists on specificity, it produces story. Story creates more sensation. The loop tightens. Recovery becomes faster when the loop is recognized early. Early recognition is not mystical, it is bodily. It is the moment you notice the tightening and realize that the next 10 minutes are at risk. The mind does not need to be calm for this, it needs to be aware. Awareness is the first interruption in the chain. Without awareness, disturbance becomes behavior. With awareness, disturbance becomes an event occurring within behavior, and that distinction gives you room. Room is what people mean when they say they want to clear their head. They often imagine this clearance as an absence of thought. In practice, clearance is simply the return of usable space between impulse and action, between sensation and story, between activation and decision. A recovered mind is not a quiet mind. It is a mind that has regained its ability to choose where attention goes. Attention is the only thing that truly needs to be righted. A disturbed mind often believes it needs to resolve the feeling before it can return to work. This is the central misunderstanding. Resolution is not a prerequisite. Contact is. Work done in the presence of disturbance can be clean if attention is returned. Work done while chasing resolution often does not happen at all. Chasing resolution becomes a disguised form of avoidance because the mind can always argue that it is not ready yet. What makes recovery feel difficult is that disturbance carries a sense of legitimacy. The mind insists that it is right to be preoccupied. It insists that the issue must be thought through. It insists that returning to the task would be irresponsible, as though the only responsible behavior is to continue replaying. This insistence can feel morally charged. It can feel like self-respect. Yet the insistence is often just the nervous system's desire to keep scanning, because scanning feels like control. Scanning is not control. It is a refusal to accept that what happened has happened. Recovery is in part the acceptance of irreversibility. A meeting went poorly, a remark landed wrong, a mistake was made, an email triggered fear. Acceptance here does not mean approval. It means letting the event move into the past where it belongs. The mind resists this because it wants the past to remain editable. If the past remains editable, the mind can keep imagining a version where it doesn't feel exposed. The editing impulse keeps the disturbance alive. The moment you stop trying to edit the past, the disturbance loses one of its main fuel sources. This is why recovery is often faster than people assume once they stop treating disturbance as a problem to be solved and start treating it as a state to be carried while continuing. Carrying is different from indulging. Carrying is the willingness to have an unsettled internal climate while still placing attention deliberately. Indulging is turning the climate into the entire environment. The practical question becomes simple and difficult at the same time. What is the next point of contact? The next point of contact is never "fix my mood." The next point of contact is something concrete: a sentence to write, a number to check, a file to open, a call to make, a question to ask. The disturbed mind resists concreteness because concreteness returns you to reality, and reality does not offer immediate emotional vindication. Reality offers only steps. The mind often wants vindication first. It wants the feeling to be justified, the other person to be wrong, the self to be redeemed. Steps feel small compared to this drama. Yet steps are how the ship is righted. Recovery is not a big correction, it is a series of small reorientations, each one returning attention to what is present. The sophistication is how quickly a person can make the first reorientation. The first reorientation is the hardest because it requires moving while the nervous system is still activated. After the first reorientation, momentum begins to appear. Momentum does not eliminate disturbance, but it reduces its gravitational pull because attention is no longer idle. Idle attention is the perfect environment for rumination. Rumination is not deep thought, it is thought without traction. It feels productive because the mind is busy. It feels responsible because it is about something that matters. But it does not move the situation. It does not move the work. It usually does not even produce insight. It produces exhaustion. The exhausted mind then becomes more vulnerable to disturbance, which makes recovery slower next time. This is one reason disturbance can become a pattern. The mind gets used to losing long stretches to internal weather and begins expecting it. Expectation is another fuel. When a person believes they will be knocked out for hours by a disturbance, they begin behaving in ways that make it true. They abandon the day quickly. They loosen their standards. They treat the disturbance as a veto. Recovery becomes a special event requiring special conditions. The mind begins waiting for itself to feel better before it can return, which is another way of saying it has placed its agency behind a locked door. Righting the ship begins with refusing that arrangement. Refusing does not mean forcing. Forcing is another form of panic, another attempt to bully the mind into calm. The recovered worker does not bully themselves, they simply return. Returning can be gentle and still be decisive. It can be quiet and still be firm. It is the decision to place attention back on a chosen surface and to treat the disturbance as something that can be carried in the background. The nervous system often protests at first because it wants the disturbance to remain central. Centrality is how the system signals importance. If something feels important, the system believes it must occupy attention. The worker's task is not to deny importance, it is to decide what kind of attention the importance deserves. Many important issues deserve scheduled attention, deliberate conversation, planned response. They do not deserve endless, immediate rumination. Immediate rumination is the mind's attempt to handle importance in the least structured way possible. Structure is part of recovery. When attention is disturbed, the mind often becomes unstructured. It jumps between thoughts, it replays fragments, it predicts without grounding. A recovered mind reintroduces structure through the simplest means, choosing one surface. One surface can be the task itself. It can also be a brief act of orienting that is not analysis, but placement. The person is not trying to feel better, they are trying to become usable again. Usability is a clearer target than calm. Calm is often imagined as a feeling. Usability is functional. A usable mind can proceed. It can choose words. It can make decisions. it can do the next small piece. Usability does not require serenity. It requires that the disturbance not be obeyed as a directive. This is why recovery can be fast. It is not waiting for sensation to vanish. It is withdrawing permission for sensation to commandeer action. Withdrawing permission is the heart of the matter. When the worker withdraws permission, the disturbance begins changing shape. It may still be present, but it loses urgency, because urgency is partly behavioral. Urgency is reinforced by checking, by replaying, by scanning, by seeking reassurance. When these behaviors stop, the disturbance loses oxygen. It may not disappear instantly, but it begins to move. It begins to become just another internal event rather than the entire stage. A person is often surprised by how quickly this happens. They assume that if they do not fully process the feeling, it will remain forever. In many cases, the opposite is true. The feeling remains because they keep processing it in circles. When attention returns to concrete work, the emotional system begins to settle because it is no longer being stimulated by narrative. The body responds to what the mind is doing. When the mind is engaged in a bounded task, the body often begins to release, not because the problem is solved, but because the system senses that control has been regained through function rather than through rumination. Function is calming in a way comfort is not. Comfort often comes from avoidance. It feels good and weakens agency. Function can feel slightly uncomfortable at first and strengthens agency. Over time, the mind learns that returning to function is the quickest route out of disturbance, not because it distracts, but because it restores orientation. This learning becomes a form of resilience that is difficult to fake. It is not positive thinking, it is practiced re-entry. A sophisticated relationship with disturbance also includes humility about recurrence. Disturbance will return. The mind will be hooked again. A person will misread something. A nerve will be touched. A stressor will spike. Training does not prevent this. Training changes the aftermath. The trained worker does not add a second disturbance, the disturbance about being disturbed. They do not judge themselves for having reactions. They do not turn a moment of agitation into a story about regression. That story would only create more noise. They treat disturbance as weather and return as the work. This is why the idea of righting the ship is more accurate than the idea of curing the storm. The goal is not to control the sea. The goal is to steer. Steering is not an act done once. It is the ongoing act of orientation. The ship drifts slightly. The hand corrects. The ship drifts again. The hand corrects again. Over time, the corrections become smaller because the drift is noticed earlier. The worker begins recovering not after the day has been lost, but after a few minutes of wobble. This is the true sophistication. Small recovery windows. Small recovery windows are not achieved by willpower at the moment of crisis. They are achieved by building familiarity with return. The mind has to learn that it can come back without first winning the argument in its head. It has to learn that it can proceed while unsettled. It has to learn that the present moment is still usable even when internal weather is loud. When it learns this, the disturbance becomes less frightening, not because it disappears, but because it no longer threatens the entire day. A person can have a sharp internal reaction and still complete the next piece of work. They can feel a surge and still speak with restraint. They can be shaken and still choose. The ship remains a ship. The course remains possible. The storm does not get to decide where the vessel goes.